And today we are going to be talking about the new, it depends how you define new in AI, right? It's new in terms of, at least I think it's been a month or so, but the Flux tools control nets. And some of you might react to that and say, wait a minute, Seb. Those are actually not control nets. And you are technically correct. These are the Flux tools, depth and canny, but I will refer to them as control nets because that's sorta how they work. But we'll talk about that in a second when I show you the workflow. And we're going to be working with Comfy today. And this workflow that's actually been sent to you, I think, by Ashna in an email.
Yes,
It's
and I'm
also
dropping
available.
that here.
Yeah, cool. And if you have been subscribing to my Patreon, this has also been available for a set time for this. It's something I uploaded. But Flux Tools ControlNet works by having a diffusion model, which is actually a canny or a depth. Well, they have more. They have fill but that's beside the point right now. So they have a canny and the depth that's integrated. It's inside of the Flux base model. What that means is when you are running, for example, the canny model, you are running the ControlNet canny for 100% of the duration. You can't turn it on and off because it's integrated into the model. So if you were to run an image, this image, for example, that I have here, you would retain everything. And this is the canny preprocessor working. So this would be used as an output 100% too, right? And you would get an image that is, well, looking something like this. You can see, obviously, this image has braids, this doesn't. But if you look at the preprocessor, well, that information is not there. So Flux kind of fills in the missing pieces. So why am I telling you all this before showing you how the workflow works? Well, the way that I've built this and why it's different from the official workflows is that we are first using this canny model, but we're then swapping to the base Flux dev model. Why are we doing this? Well, remember I said, well, we can't set the strength on this model. So we can't decide how much of this ControlNet we're using. But by swapping the model, we can decide when we're swapping the model. So let's say, for example, here, we are running this for 20 steps. And if we are running the canny model for 20 steps, well, that would be 100% of the generation, right? But the cool part about this workflow is if I, for example, set this to 10 steps here, so this controls when we change the model, then we would run the first model for 10 steps, and then we're swapping and we're running the remaining 10 steps with the base model. So that means that we're running ControlNet for 50% and no ControlNet for 50%. Why is this good? Well, if you want to create something that is not fully resembling this, just closely, you want maybe a pose that is somewhat similar, but not exactly that, then you could lower that value. And I'm going to show you some examples doing precisely this. And if you are running this on ThinkDiffusion, you should be good to go. You need to go into your manager and you need to install the missing custom nodes and restart. After that, you're fine. All of these models should be pre-installed for you. If you're running this locally, you need to download them. Here are some download links. The first ones, these go into models / diffusion models. The other go into clip, and the last one into VAE. So let's lower this to like 3. Now, if we're running this, we have a prompt here. A dramatic cinematic photo portrait of a Viking shield maiden. We have some, more stuff here. She has long braided hair, yada, yada, yada. But we're using this as an input and turning this into a Viking shield maiden. Now we set the first ControlNet, or the ControlNet strength, to 3. That means we're running it for 3 steps. So basically, this is what the ControlNet does. It runs it for 3 steps. So it's not very long, right? And then it takes this, throws it over to the regular Flux, and works from there, giving us a proper looking output. But you might say, well, this doesn't resemble this. Well, that's correct, because we only ran it for 3 steps. And if you play with this value, you can increase or decrease how closely you are resembling the original image, right? We are currently doing this with the canny model. And we can see now that in the preview here, for our first 10 steps, we're fairly close to the input and what we see here on the canny, right? So the remaining 10 steps would use this as an input and then work with this without a ControlNet. Now, if you want to deviate more from this, you could actually use the depth model instead. And when I say depth, I would show you what that is. To select that one, first we have to, I made the switch here. So setting this to false. So false would be depth and true would be canny. We also need to select the depth model here. Now this will take a few seconds to load. So I just preloaded that in here. What basically happens is you would get a depth map of this image instead. And again, why is this good? Well, if we change this prompt to something else, let's say a biomechanical robot. And if let's run this at 10 steps, so 50% of the generation at first. Inside here now, compared to the canny, here we have a lot of values or not a lot of information, a lot of data inside here. So all these lines will be remembered and tried sort of being used into the output. In this, we have lots more space to work with. So we're basically defining, here's the shape. And then everything can happen inside of that shape. And that we can clearly see in our output now, because it's a much different looking image. So that's a great way how you can have the same shape as your input image, but get a completely different output. But again, if you don't want that, you can use the canny and you will more closely resemble the original, right? We could decrease this even further. Let's say 3 again here. And you can see we just ran this. This is a 3-step preview image, and the remaining 17 steps will work from this without a ControlNet. As you can see, we've got a completely different image. Because those remaining 17 steps without a ControlNet, I mean, that's a major part of the generation. So it could turn into anything. So I would probably go here and maybe put that to 5. Not the remaining 15 steps. will now be closer to the image while still giving it a lot of creative control. Here we can see we're getting a lot of extra inside of this while still retaining our original, right? So you can see it's based on the same image by just having a lot of extra stuff there. Let's talk a little bit about some of the details in this workflow. So what you need to be concerned about when you're working with this is all the nodes up here. So we have the steps, we're loading an image, right? Making sure that our models are loading properly. We're writing a prompt, what you want to see. And we're adjusting the ControlNet strength and the sliders here, like we talked about. That's what you need to run this. But there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So let's say, for example, that you upload a different image. Let's take this Viking shield maiden here. It's a theme, right? Now you can see this is a vertical image, but we don't have any size information anywhere here. So let's run this. Now this is also vertical. And this will also turn vertical without us even setting the size. I'm going to show you in a second. We're just going to look at the result here. Pretty cool. A little low quality, so I would probably run that again. Sometimes you're unlucky, but that is what it is. Now, what happens down here is we're actually loading the image size. So in this case, it's a fairly small image, 1024 by 1496. But you could upload a huge image. Let me find something on my desktop here. So I actually have this old image I took when I got my award. I'm using this because I know for a fact that that's a big image. And you can see, well, big-ish. It's 3000 by 4000. But what happens then is it's actually an old node, SDXL recommended resolution. So it's resizing it to a size that is close to 1024, which happens to be the optimal resolution for both Flux and SDXL. So it's going to retain the aspect ratio and just resize it to a size close to 1024 and then work from there. Here we got our first image and, well, it just turned into another dude. But you get the point. Now down here, we are running 2K samplers. So we talked about swapping the models during the generation, right? So the ControlNet model, the depth or the canny model, that one runs in here. And the result of that is what you see in the preview here. The second one, the final one, so to speak, is here. So we're sending the image through a latent from this to this. And the good part about sending an image through a latent is it doesn't degrade anything. If we were to use a VAE decode and turn it into an image, and you can VAE decode and encode back and forth, you would essentially degrade the quality of the image every time. But we can just send it through a latent. Now that's a little overkill in terms of knowledge, but it can be good to know. So I think we covered most of the basics of how to work with this model. I should mention that we're using, or this workflow, but we are using the FP8 versions of these models. Why are we doing this? Well, because we're using two of them, essentially we're using more system RAM, so it's going to take up more resources. These are smaller, so they will take up less of your resources. if you have a beefy machine or if you're using the Ultra machine on ThinkDiffusion, you can use the full-size models. There's a Flux dev here, and find, well, I think I only download, well, actually there it is, the Flux dev or the canny dev. That will get you better end results, but it will use up more resources essentially. That means you can also change, if you're using those, you have to change this to default, I think. That will run 16, and this too. It'll also take a little longer to generate. Let me catch up on some of the questions here. I just saw that Olivier just asked what GPU is the Ultra. I don't know currently. I know it's a 48 gigabyte one. If someone remembers, put it in the chat. I don't remember that right now. Let's see what else we got. Can we expand the workflow to have 3 stages, canny, depth, and then base? Well, that's a kind of a complicated question, because if you're going back and looking at like Stable Diffusion ControlNets, you had a base model, and then you're taking the ControlNets and just slapping them on. So basically, you can use like a depth, a canny, an open post. You can use how many you want and just slap them on top of them. The way that this works is you can't really do that in the same way. So if you want to use both canny and depth, you have to use them individually and swap them. So you could add another low diffusion model, add another K sampler, where it essentially goes from, let's say you have 30% depth or 30% canny, and well, 33% as the rest of as the base model. But it wouldn't really improve the end result in any way because of how Black Forest Labs used these tools, so to speak, why they integrated the ControlNets into the models. So it's an interesting question, but not something that is you would use, really. Let's see what else we got. Jan again asked, don't the earlier steps have more weight? So the first 10 steps would have more effect on the output image. Yes, the first steps are more defining when it comes to what the image is going to look like. So yeah, it's like a slider that goes like up, or a curve that goes up, and then it like flattens out by the end. By the end, it's just trying to define the details of the image. Now, what does that info give you? A lot, honestly, more than that. Let's say that you set this to 18 or 19 or 20. Well, you would probably get the same results here from 18 or 20, right? But if you set this to 1 or 3, the change between 1 and 2 is more than between 19 and 20. Again, a little overkill, but yeah. Let me see what else we got. Gilad asked, will there be a recording? Yes, there will be. I think someone is even going to edit this. Not me this time, thankfully. That was some of those questions. What else we got down here? Here we got a longer one. Let's see. Dippen asks, input object image, can we use 100% same without change in texture? For example, use case is I have one flower pot image. I want to set an interior room. For example, I have a tile texture, and I want to set same texture on the wall or floor with realistic reflection, shadowy stuff. I think you have to please restate that question in a different way. I'm not fully understanding that. But just to answer the first part, like if the input image can be used 100% same without changing texture. Well, there will be some change, but the way you can control that, let's say that you're using Canny, for example. So the model uses this. The model does not look at this unless you have a lower denoising and you build a different workflow. But that's something else. For this use case, the model only looks at this. And how do you change this without changing the image? Well, you can change these values. So if you change the threshold here, you will change how much or how little you see of the input image. Now, I can't explain to you or give you like a sound way on how to use this. You're going to have to play with the values until you find something that works for you. But yeah, I think, that partly answers your questions. So feel free to ask again. I'll try to get back to that. Shazam asks, if I'm trying to create using this tool with regard to video, what is Seb's quick suggest of PC requirements? So if you're using ComfyUI locally with anything video, the main factor is going to be your graphics card, the GPU. So get a NVIDIA card with as much of VRAM as you can, basically, and let that take up most of the budget. That's basically it. It's going to be expensive, but it is what it is. And if you feel that's out of your budget, you have solutions like this, ThinkDiffusion, where you can get a 48 gig machine and pay, a couple bucks by the hour. Jacob asks, I understand that the ControlNet is merged into the checkpoint. Do you know of any way to make custom model merges or fine-tunes with these ControlNets added? Well, it would be probably, I haven't done that on these specifically, but if my understanding is correct, it would be the same way as you do the regular Flux models. So you could essentially train a LoRa on top of the Flux depth, for example, or make a fine tune on that. So if you find a guy that does it on the regular Flux dev, it should, in theory, work the same way on the depth and the canny models. But don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. But in theory, it should. As I haven't tested that yet. Gilad asks, is it possible to do an animation like this with a consistent character? Yes, but not with this particular workflow. There are different workflows for animation. Search for animate diff to get started with that. There are lots of ways on how to control your animations, and that's like 10 webinars probably. So we're not going to cover any animation today. But there's a lot of info out there. I got some videos on the topic, and many, many tools for it. Abiram asks, are there open post ControlNets available for Flux? Not any that I think are particularly good. Black Forest Labs does not have one. I think that either Shacker or X Labs, I think they have one. I think it's called like ControlNet Union Pro, where they have an open post integrated. So if you check, it should be, I think at my latest ControlNet video covers that. So if check out my latest Flux ControlNet video and you'll see some examples of open posts with Flux.
Hey, Sebastian, do you think we could take one or two questions live, like unmute folks and...
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's going to be a surprise what we get. So, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, guys, anyone wants to unmute, ask Sebastian a question, just raise your hand and I'll, yeah. Do that.
In the meantime, I'll answer Sebastian Anthony's question, and good to see you again. My friend and namesake, have you ever combined Flux ControlNet with IP adapter, checker labs, for example? I have not, but I've seen good results where people combine it with Flux Redux, which essentially also is an IP adapter, but they're not calling it an IP adapter in the same way that they're not calling this ControlNet. So I would look at Flux Redux and try to get that working with this. Lorenzo asks, can you please show me again on how to handle the image resolution? Well, actually, you don't have to handle it because it's handled automatically with these nodes. So in this workflow, you can't even manually change it. It is automatically calculated to be close to 1024 by 1024. Dorian asks, what would be the best workflow to make a 3D render look photorealistic while preserving the structure of the objects? Example, cars, industrial architecture. Well, I would use a canny ControlNet, probably. This workflow can get you part of the way, depending on, well, what end result you're looking for. But I would look at canny ControlNets basically, and this is a way to do that. Fran asks, we didn't have any, Aishna, we didn't have any live questions, right? I'm just keep going here.
Gavin, do you want to unmute since you're on video? Do you want to just go for it?
Yo, hello.
Hey.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you great.
Yeah, hey, dude. So I've been sort of exploring, I don't know if you know Furkan, his research with creating the custom checkpoints and LoRa's.
I know him well, and I've seen him all over Reddit. So have
yeah.
everyone else.
Yeah, I've done a few like screen share tutorials with him. And I've been exploring creating some custom checkpoints trained on like specific products. And the results are pretty incredible. I'm sort of an advertising photographer, so this seems like quite a revolutionary approach. It's just licensing issues at the moment, but it seems like a real game changer for ad campaigns, etc. And I'm just wondering if you've had any, if you've explored any of these sort of kind of deep fine tuning processes and what your results have been.
Yeah, I actually tried this like when Flux was released way back and had great success with it. So I start off, I think we can, I might even have, see, can I find slides? And
I hear my 3-year-old coming in
here.
quite hot, so I'm just going to get outside.
Let's see.
So I've sort of I've done one or two with characters, and it seems to be a lot easier to control the results as opposed to products, because there's not much reference in terms of when you do train a checkpoint on a product. There's no real reference to the scale of relation to people. So when you do like a still life environment, it's pretty good. But as soon as you start,
yeah, I kind of lost you there a little bit, Gavin.
It struggles to understand if you've. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we have you back now.
Okay.
No,
no, I was just. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, to answer your question a little bit, I did test that a bit. I didn't find the examples to show you, but I tested all basically from building like larger models. For example, I made examples. Let's say a 30 image model of a car in different angles. I tried doing clothing, like either from one image from the front and 2 images front and back. And my findings was that in the majority of the cases, it kind of sorted out the scale pretty good. Like, obviously, some generations were off, but in general, it was surprisingly good. Now, I did use, I mean, clothing obviously is something that it understands. I mean, if it's a t-shirt, it knows how long a t-shirt should be. Other products that are unique, where it doesn't really know what the scale should be, obviously is going to be harder. So if I were to train on that, I would also put them in different real life scenarios in the training data.
Okay, I see what you're saying. And do you know if there's any workarounds for the commercial licensing for Flux? Because it seems like I know Black Forest Labs, they have I've spoken to them, it's like a $5,000 a month to get a commercial license. And I know there are some workarounds, but yeah, it seems quite tricky to integrate this commercially at this stage.
It is tricky, and it is also tricky. I don't want to bash too much on them, but it's tricky to, they don't have a lot of people working on that side. They're researchers and they're doing great job with researching. They're spending they could spend more time on focusing on that part and getting it more available. With that said, the way that I understand the licensing, I'm not a lawyer by any means, but you are, as long as you are a smaller creative or a smaller business, you can use the output of the models for commercial purposes, but to use the model as a service, then that's a different use case altogether. But if you as a photographer just want to use your outputs and sell them to a client, my understanding is that that's totally fine. We got actually Aishna hand up from Fran. I see there's a few more questions that I missed.
I'm just gonna get Fran, and then we can take the questions in the chat. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Fran.
Hi. How are you? Do you hear me?
I hear you well.
Thank you, and thank you so much. It's been a great, really, very, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
So I actually I had some questions in the chat related with Leighton that I'm going to ask you now, because I have another question related with license but about the Leighton, for example, in Excel, usually we can add, like, when we load the image, external image from the system, and we can use the denoise to play around how to apply the effects of the AI with the Bay encode. Is it possible to use Bay encode in Flux? Or because I always saw like it's an empty latent,
I'm not sure how. I mean,
like
I'm
play
not sure I
around with the
understand your
denoise.
question. You can
Like,
use the encode and decode. So
really? Okay.
for example,
Okay.
I mean, I could like send this back.
Yeah.
From, like, here I've decoded, right? And I could
Yeah.
send this back to an encode again. So you could load the image, send it through an encode, and send it through a latent. But you just remember that every time you do the decode, you're sort of degrading the quality a little bit. It might not be noticeable, but if you do it enough times, might be a difference.
What I mean is, like, for example, when you load the image, you put you use the ControlNet to control the form of the image, and you add the size of the image through another node that I'm not seeing.
So
like,
the size is
the size,
coming from here.
Yeah.
So we're loading the image size, and then we're resizing to the resolution that we want.
Exactly. And the latent from the case sampler, how we are adding it.
So the latent. So this is the first case sampler.
Yeah.
That latent is actually from instruct pix to pix, and that is taking in a pixel value here.
Perfect. So if we play around with the denoise, we can show up, let's say, the original image, right?
Yes, but then you have to rebuild it a little bit because the pixels here are coming from this.
Oh yeah.
So now we're just sending this into the K-sampler.
Yeah. That's what I meant. Like, because for example, to make an upscaler and use Flux to add some details, like magnific, no? Let's say, we
Yeah, I can actually
could.
show you how you could do that.
Okay.
You have a second. I mean, we're over time anyway, officially. So we're just taking some questions here before we're ending. So let me see. Flux upscaler only. So this is an upscaler that I use personally, and it's using Flux to send basically into Ultimate as the upscale, which is a very popular upscale since Stable Diffusion 1.5. I don't think it was available in 1.4. And here you're sending basically image in through the image, and the encode or is done inside of here, and the decode is done also inside of here, I think. Well, it must be since there's no latent. Yeah, I see you got muted, but I hope that answers your question. This is also available. I either, just take a screenshot of this or download it from my Patreon, whatever you want to do. And you can see the values here. Prompt is nothing. Let me catch up on some of the questions here, Aishna, before we drop off.
Yeah. I think we had one by role.
Yeah, Rawl says, my question is whether ComfyUI is now adapted to combine animative control and for animation as it was done before Flux, or if you still need to wait. I know Cog can produce good videos, but achieving something that competes with Kling or Sora is probably not possible yet. Well, Cog Video X, LTX, Onion are probably the top open source choices that you can use right now, but they don't have as much as control as Animative and ControlNet have, especially when it comes to image. They're using, or video to video. They're using different ways to achieve that. So the question is sort of no, but you can still achieve good result, especially from Onion is pretty good, I think. Neil asks, I'm an absolute beginner when it comes to using Flux ComfyUI. Could you recommend any resource for the beginner to learn from? Well, obviously I'm biased, so my videos. If you want to like take a very tech deep dive, you have Mateo, Latent Division. I think, from those two recommendations, you're going to get very far in Comfy. Let's see. Fran asks again, if we create a Flux image and we go through Magnific, do we have license? Well, from my understanding, Magnific's upscaler is basically an Ultimate SD upscale. Now, I haven't used their tool in a very long time, so I think, well, originally they used Stable Diffusion. I don't know if they've transferred to Flux. So if they're using Stable Diffusion, you should be fine. If they're using Flux, well, they need to have a business license, which is really hard to get right now. So I have no idea is the answer.
Just one question from Dorian, Sebastian, and I dropped that to you. Does the ControlNet work on Flux with Forge UI?
Does the ControlNet work on Flux with Forge UI. I have not tested that. I'm just thinking, why should it not work? I can't answer that right now. I'm sorry. I should really test that out. I'm talking about these ControlNet specifically. And yeah, that's a question I can't answer right now. You know, it's probably just go in, Forge, load up the same depth model or canny model like these, Flux step, and see if it works. There's your answer, basically. Yash asks, is good Flux in Paint or ControlNet in Paint with Flux base model available? Yes. So I'm going to do some. You basically want, Sebastian, camp in Flux in Paint. You want this one, Ultimate Guide. We're just going to clear 33 minutes of Flux in Paint. This is what you need. I covered everything when it comes to Flux in Painting. And if you don't know Flux in Painting after that, well, it could be my fault, but I don't think it is. So try that. Thanks for tuning in. We covered some extra ground today, and I hope you learned something. You can download the workflow from, well, it was, you know, you got a couple of emails about that. So should you set you up. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sebastian. This was amazing. Guys, you know, I think Diffusion, we've been organizing these for a few months, so amazing to see the response. You know, just letting you know, while we have the product and we have the studio, we also have one-to-one consultation. And if any of you had like a business use case or wanted a professional deep dive one-to-one with experts, I'm dropping the link in chat and you can kind of go and book a discovery call and explore that further or sign up for TD Edge. That's kind of what we made that for. Yeah, I'm gonna also just want to check in with you how the webinar was. I'm gonna launch a poll and just would love to get a dipstick on how did this go for you. Yeah.
Cool. I just want to catch one last question I see here. Marlena asks if she wants to generate high resolution images. Don't try to generate them big at the beginning. Generate at the base resolution. So 1 megapixel, 2 megapixel, close to 1024 or up to like 2000. Then use an upscaler like this that you see on the screen right now. That will get you very far. If you have more questions, PM me on Discord. I'll answer most of the time if you're nice.